Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Spain, more than 900 people have died from the coronavirus over the past 24 hours, taking the country's tally to nearly 11,000. There are now 117,000 confirmed cases, but the data shows the rate of new cases is falling.
Governments across the world are ramping up measures to try to slow down the spread of the coronavirus. But it took less than a week for the number to double from 500,000 to 1 million, with a total of over 53,100 deaths. More than half of all the cases have been in Europe, with Italy and Spain worst affected. The United States reported the highest daily death toll in any country so far at nearly 1,200. With more than 245,500 confirmed cases, the US is approaching 3 times the official number recorded in China. It now has more than 6,000 fatalities as the contagion rapidly spreads. In Iran, the death toll has risen to more than 3,300 after it confirmed another 134 deaths in a day. The virus has infected over 53,000 people there. The WHO has called on countries to increase testing as the true number of cases is thought to be much higher.
The SAARC has backed Pakistan's proposal for a video conference of the health ministers of the bloc on COVID-19. The bloc's Secretary General Isala Ruwan Virakun appreciated the proposal during a phone call with Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi. The Foreign Office said Virakun and Qureshi agreed on the need for joint efforts for fighting the coronavirus pandemic. Pakistan has been pushing the idea since India hosted a video conference of the SAARC leaders on March 15. Meanwhile, infection cases in Pakistan have increased to 2,458 with 126 recoveries. In the last 24 hours, 4 people have died, raising the total to 35. The province of Punjab leads in cases number with 928 infected people. Sindh has declared a complete lockdown for 3 hours today as the infections rose to 783. Pakistan has criticized India's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party for its Islamophobic ideology. In a tweet, Prime Minister Imran Khan said the BJP leadership speaks about 200 million Muslims, just as the German Nazis spoke about the Jews. Prime Minister Imran Khan was referring to an interview given by BJP parliamentarian Subramanian Swamy. Swamy said Muslims are not equal in India, and wherever Muslim population is large, they... Meanwhile, in another inhumane act, police in Indian-occupied Kashmir have announced to arrest anyone who speaks up against the domicile law. Moving on, Pakistan has apprised a UN chief about India's belligerent move of introducing new domicile rules in occupied Kashmir. In a telephone call with Antonio Guterres, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said India's move is a blatant violation of the 4th Geneva Convention. He said the UN and the international community must take steps to prevent India from changing the demography of occupied valley. Qureshi also discussed ways to mitigate coronavirus. He hailed the Secretary General's initiative of establishing an emergency fund of $2 billion for COVID-19 response. Meanwhile, Qureshi also discussed coronavirus measures with his UAE counterpart, Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan. The US has expressed concerns over a shift of Afghanistan's financial matters to the presidential office. US envoy for South Asian Affairs Alice Wells said Afghans need accountable government. She said the government is putting the key constituents of the financial matters under the presidential palace. Wells was referring to a report published by the US Institute of Peace. The report says the Kabul administration is eviscerating the finance ministry and gravely weakening one of the country's most effective institutions. It said the move will jeopardize the sustainability of the peace if an agreement is reached with the Taliban. Meanwhile, the World Bank has approved a $100 million aid for Afghanistan for the fight against COVID-19. The bank said the fund is part of an emergency response and health system preparedness project of the institution. Israel has arrested Palestine's Jerusalem Minister Fadi al-Hadami. Jerusalem Affairs Ministry says Israeli police raided the minister's house in Savannah neighborhood and took him into custody. The ministry said the police broke down doors and smashed the windows of the minister's house. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shatayyeh has called for al-Hadami's immediate release. He said Israel continues to target those who ever work for Jerusalem, even at critical moments like COVID-19 pandemic. Lebanon says Israeli forces have crossed the fence along their border and carried out a search operation. State media said the Lebanese troops remained on alert while Israeli forces used a smoke bomb to break in near the southern town of Mas al-Jabal. It said Israel's action forced the mobilization of the Lebanese army and the UN's international peacekeeping forces. It added that Israeli forces set up a small tent in the vicinity while being protected by their Merkava tank. Israel's border breach comes after Lebanon filed a complaint to UN against Tel Aviv for violating its airspace. The complaint was lodged after 3 Israeli warplanes flew over Lebanese airspace to launch missiles on the Syrian province of Homs. Libya's UN-recognized government of the National Accord says it has killed 20 militants of Khalifa Haftar-led Eastern Forces. GNA-led Burkan al-Ghadab operation. Spokesman Mustafa al-Muji says the militia members were killed in an airstrike in Sarat city. Officials said the GNA forces have ramped up the operation and cleared several frontline positions in Tripoli and Sarat cities. GNA said other Air Force strikes hit Haftar's forces position on al-Weshka frontline. Since April last year, Libya has been torn apart by a civil war between the GNA and the Libyan National Army. Turkey says it has killed 10 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in northern Syria. The defense ministry says the fighters were killed during Operation Peace Spring in the region. The ministry said it will not stop the operations against the militants in the region. Yesterday, Turkey killed 14 PKK militants during Operation Euphrates Shield. Since 2016, Turkey has launched a trio of operations across its border into northern Syria. Ankara holds the fighter group responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year conflict. Syria says 2 people have been killed while 4 others wounded in shelling by Turkey-backed rebels in Hasaka northwestern countryside. State media said the rebels launched an attack with the rocket shells against civilian houses in the villages of Kabir Saghir and Al-Abush in Tal Tamir. It said 3 civilians were wounded in rebels' mortar attack on the village of Rabayat. Earlier, government officials said the rebel forces are violating a truce deal brokered between Turkey and Russia. They said the rebels have breached the cessation of hostilities agreement for several times in a week. Last month in Moscow, Turkey and Russia reached an agreement to cease fire and start joint patrolling on a key border highway. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. UN General Assembly has unanimously adopted a resolution calling for increased global solidarity and international cooperation against the COVID-19 pandemic. It is the first UN resolution on the outbreak, coming after the number of coronavirus cases surpassed 1 million worldwide. The resolution was prepared by Norway, Switzerland, Singapore, Indonesia, Liechtenstein, and Ghana, and sponsored by 188 countries. The resolution emphasized on the need for assistance to the poor and the most affected countries. The resolution highlighted the need to respect human rights and oppose any form of discrimination, racism, and xenophobia in response to the coronavirus. The US has fired a commander for raising alarm over Navy's incompetence in containing coronavirus on board aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt. In a letter, Captain Brett Crozier urged his superiors to act to prevent US troops dying outside of wartime. Acting US Navy Secretary Thomas Modley said the commander exercised extremely poor judgment. Morley said the captain was being fired for allegedly leaking the letter to the media, which created the impression the Navy was not responding to his questions. 114 of more than 4,000 crew members have tested positive for COVID-19. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has invoked the Defense Production Act to aid companies building ventilators for coronavirus patients. Last week, Trump first invoked the emergency powers to compel auto giant General Motors to produce ventilators. In the U.S., Democratic National Committee has postponed its nominating convention from July to August over the coronavirus pandemic. DNC officials said the convention will now be held on 17th of August in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, about a week before the Republican Party's convention. The postponement comes days after Joe Biden called for the convention to be moved due to the coronavirus. Meanwhile, Wisconsin officials bluffed ahead with the plans for a presidential primary next week, despite challenges amid the pandemic. The state's Democratic governor and the Republican-controlled legislature have not moved to delay the primary and local elections scheduled for Tuesday. Germany has warned of unspecified countries abusing the coronavirus crisis for their own propaganda and for spreading fake news. In a virtual statement, Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said it is appropriate to take countermeasures to fend off such attempts. Maas was speaking in Berlin ahead of a video conference meeting with his counterparts from other NATO members. Maas did not name the countries after being asked how the current crisis changed the relationship with China and Russia. According to an EU document, Russian media deployed a disinformation campaign against the West to worsen the impact of the coronavirus. The Kremlin denied the allegations, saying they were unfounded.
Sich gegenseitig helfen. Ich will daran erinnern.
What we are warning about and what we need to discuss at today's NATO meeting and what we already talked about on an EU level is that some are abusing the situation for propaganda purposes in order to look better.
In Australia, New South Wales police have transported health professionals and an independent medical team to the Ruby Princess cruise ship. The team will test the crew members for new coronavirus. The operation is part of the government's efforts to deal with the 8 cruise ships in Australian waters of the East Coast. Speaking in Sydney, Police Commissioner Mick Fuller said there were nearly 8,500 crew members in ships that needed to be checked. He said if a small percentage ends up with the virus, it would overwhelm the country's health system. Meanwhile, Australia's science agency has started trials on ferrets to produce a vaccine against the novel coronavirus. The Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization said the testing is likely to take 3 months. The move comes after the country reported over 5,000 confirmed cases with a total of 24 deaths. European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen has expressed concern over coronavirus measures taken by Hungary, saying they went too far. Hungary's parliament on Monday granted Prime Minister Viktor Orban an open-ended right to rule by decree. In a news conference, von der Leyen said Hungary's measures should be limited in time and subject to scrutiny. More than a dozen EU member states, including Germany, Spain and France, have expressed concern the new law could be used to muzzle journalists critical of Orban. Meanwhile, the Czech member of the Executive Commission, Vera Jourova, said this is the time to kill coronavirus, not to kill democracy. She said when governments gain more powers to manage a crisis, they should be under democratic control. In the U.S., a man who derailed a train near the Navy hospital ship Mercy docked in Los Angeles faces up to 20 years in jail. The U.S. Attorney's Office says the man was identified as 44-year-old Eduardo Moreno. In a statement released by the office, he admitted in 2 separate interviews that he intentionally derailed and crashed the train near the Mercy. The train ran off the end of the track and through barriers before stopping about 230 meters away from the ship. The first epicenter of coronavirus, the Chinese city of Wuhan, is looking to get back to work as the number of new cases drops in the country. Countries' non-profit organizations and the volunteers are steering projects to revive normalcy in the post-pandemic situation. More in this report.
After months of lockdown and thousands of deaths, Wuhan is finally trying to get back on its feet. Leading a team of 60 volunteers, Zhang Quan, a former soldier, is focusing on disinfecting hospitals and schools.
At the beginning, we were focusing on the communities. Now, because the city is about to return to work, we focus on government department buildings, hospitals and schools.
Lockdown had paralyzed Wuhan, the city of 11 million people. Public transits, as well as taxi services, were shut down, leaving it mostly to ordinary citizens to keep the city running.
Our misty machine can spray a wide range. When we go a couple of rounds, normally it won't leave dead corner. Because it is mist, as long as it can be ventilated, then the mist can flow.
The city has started to relax restrictions in the past week. People will now start leaving the city on 8th April, more than 2 months after the curbs were put in place in late January.
US President Donald Trump says he expects Saudi Arabia and Russia to announce a deal on a cut in oil production by up to 15 million barrels a day. In a Twitter post, Trump said he spoke to Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince in an attempt to defuse a price war between Riyadh and Moscow. Crude prices rose to $25 a barrel after his tweets, which also mentioned a phone call between Crown Prince and Russian leader Vladimir Putin. However, the Russian media quoted the Kremlin as saying that Putin and Crown Prince did not talk. Saudi Arabia has called for an urgent meeting of OPEC and other countries to discuss the market situation. European Union has announced a $109 billion funding plan to help member states subsidize workers' wages during coronavirus health emergency. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says member states have to pay a quarter of cash for support to mitigate unemployment risks in an emergency plan. Leyen said every euro in EU budget must be activated to help them stem the economic shock created by the pandemic. She said all the budget rules will be relaxed so the money can reach those people that need it as quickly as possible. Leyen said the EU next long-term budget should emulate US Marshall Plan enacted to help European countries after World War II.
This is why we introduced today's SURE. SURE is Europe-supported, short-time work. It can mitigate the effects of the recession. It keeps people in work. It enables companies to return to the market with renewed vigor.
The World Bank has approved a loan of $35 million to help Argentina contain the new coronavirus pandemic. In a joint statement, the World Bank and Argentina's government said the loan will be used to purchase medical supplies. The loan is part of a larger $14 billion package the bank has made available to help countries mitigate the impact of the pandemic. Health Minister Gáiz González Garcia says that these resources, Argentina will continue to strengthen the response level of its health system. The loan is to be paid back for 32 years with a 7-year grace period. Argentina has reported 1,265 cases of COVID-19, 37 deaths. European markets are trading lower as another rocky week of trading draws to a close amid coronavirus crisis. Investors are scrambling to sell off their equity positions as fresh data shows Eurozone manufacturing collapsed to an all-time low in March. London's FTSE 100 is trading over 1% lower. CAC 40 in Paris has lost about 1%, while Frankfurt's DAX has also lost about 0.5%. In Asia, Shanghai Composite closed over 0.5% lower. Seoul's Kospi and Nikkei 225 have fallen flat. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price has surged over 5.5%, shedding early losses. Another weather situation from around the globe. That's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.news.